Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Rudy Brioche, and I am the president of the Harvard Kennedy School Black Alumni Association. It's great to see everyone. Building on the legacy, the vision, the dedication of past leaders of the Black Alumni Association, and on behalf of my fellow executive officers, welcome to the inaugural Black History Month State of Leadership Lecture and Dialogue. Black History Month and Negro History Week before it is a special time in the United States and other parts of the world to honor the very significant and often overlooked contribution of people of the African diaspora to the history of the United States and the world. In the US, it is a time when we very intentionally examine the central role that African Americans play in developing the history, the conscious, and the moral fiber of our country and its people. It is time for us to not only study and examine the past, but also examine and build our future, a future towards that more perfect union that President Obama talked about in 2008. And there's no better place than here at the Harvard Kennedy School to have this controversial, sometimes contentious, and perhaps even confrontational, but always necessary conversation. Because it is at the Kennedy School where students, scholars, alumni from community organizers, business leaders, government officials to national leaders come to ask, what can you do to move theory into action, challenges into solutions, dreams into hopes and plans and strategy. Black History Month itself has a very special place at Harvard. George Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black History Month and the author of the influential book, The Miseducation of the Negro, is the second African-American to receive his doctorate from Harvard in 1912. It's 110 years ago. He is the second only to W.E. Deval, who received his doctorate from Harvard in 1895. To honor the Harvard legacy and to use the global platform of Harvard and the Kennedy School, we are endeavoring to answer and address the urgent need to engage in a critical examination of how we are leading ourselves. The Black Alumni Association is proud to launch the first annual Black History Month State of Leadership Lecture and Dialogue. Our keynote is dedicated to Carter G. Woodson, and our subsequent dialogue is dedicated to W.E. Deval. Our vision is for this annual event to be a place where the Harvard community come to reflect on our current state of the political, business, social, cultural leadership in the US and throughout the world. This annual Black History Month event will reflect the perspectives of Black people and also of all people who share Black love, who share in the identity, in the struggle, in the achievement of Black people. Therefore, we're looking critically at not just the formal, but also the informal sources of institutional power, their leaders, their impact on the global and diverse Black community. This is necessary because leadership matters. Today, we are fortunate that our inaugural Carter G. Woodson keynote speaker is the Honorable Patrick Deval, former governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the W.E. Deval dialogue will be led by the trailblazing Donna Brazile, a former Institute of Politics fellow. To help us kick off this event, we went to the center of the civil rights movement, Atlanta, Georgia, where the ongoing struggle of civil human voting rights continue. And that is often expressed in music. That legacy is alive and well today. Miss Gates is a bassist, a vocalist, a composer from Atlanta, Georgia. She reps the Winthrop House here at Harvard College. She's studying anthropology and a member of the class of 2003. She's pursuing a dual degree with Berkeley of music and jazz performance, where she has studied with the Institute of Jazz and Gender and Justice and the Global Jazz Institute. She has performed with many jazz greats. In 2002, she released the EP Voice and Bass, recently composed an original work with the Harvard Choir. In the spirit of the Kennedy School model of Ask What You Can Do, Ms. Gates will perform her rendition of the contemporary national spiritual Stand By Me. So therefore, without any further ado, Ms. Gates.
Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. And I'm so humbled to be trying to create a space in which the type of conversations that need to be had can be had, especially during Black History Month, especially at a place like the Kennedy School. It is a true honor, and I'm so thankful for the opportunity to hold space here and to attempt to use this, as really an invitation for us to remember, solidarity at all times, especially after the challenging couple of years this entire world has faced. And also to serve as hopefully a representative of my generation in this conversation. I've been thinking a lot about the future and, the idea of not only one potential future, but of creating space for multiple potential futures to emerge. I know it sounds a little heady, but I feel like that's something that we could all focus on in terms of these broad, abstract seeming discussions. Acknowledging multiplicity as, not only something that complicates things, but complicates things in a way that is real, in a way that needs to be thought about and addressed. And so without further ado, from my common room in Winthrop House, I hope to serenade you.
The music is not coming through to me. Are others having trouble?
Okay, what about if I turn on this button? There we go. Has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we see. No, I won't be afraid. No, I won't be afraid. Just as long as you stand by me, and darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. And if the skies that we look upon should tumble and fall, and the mountains, oh, they should crumble into the sea. No, I won't cry, no, you stand by me? Ooh, won't you stand by? Ooh, won't you stand by? Won't you stand by me? Thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful event. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm Doug Elmendorf, the Dean of the Kennedy School. It's my great pleasure to offer my own greeting to you for the HKS Black Alumni Association's inaugural lecture and dialogue in Black History Month on the state of leadership. I wasn't told I would have to be following Deval when I made the introduction. Seems a little unfair, Rudy. But I want to thank all the members of the Black Alumni Association for your ongoing efforts to deepen understanding in the HKS community of issues facing Black Americans and the global Black community, and your efforts to help educate people about approaches to make our societies more fair. I'm especially grateful to Rudy Brioche for taking on the leadership of the Black Alumni Association, and grateful to him and the BA's executive board for organizing this wonderful event tonight. As you know, the Kennedy School trains public leaders and policymakers to be principled and effective. I hope you saw this in your time at the school, and I hope you're finding that the school helped to prepare you for the leadership challenges that you face now in your careers and your lives. One of the ways in which our students learn about leadership is through our faculty members who have come from senior leadership positions in government, or in some cases, nonprofit organizations, the private sector, or a combination of these sectors. These faculty practitioners teach from their experiences and serve as crucial members and role models for Kennedy School students. We could not ask for a better public leader to serve as teacher, mentor, and role model for our students than the most recent person to join the Kennedy School faculty, Governor Deval Patrick. Governor Patrick is a professor of the practice of public leadership and co-director of our Center for Public Leadership, and I'm thrilled to have him as a new colleague. I can't possibly review all of Deval's accomplishments here, but I will call out a few highlights. He was raised, as you may know, in the South Side of Chicago, came to Massachusetts as a teenager to go to school with a scholarship from a Boston-based organization called A Better Chance. Deval graduated from Harvard College in 1978 and from Harvard Law School in 1982. Somehow he missed coming to the Kennedy School during that period, but we're making up for that by having him with us now. He served as a staff attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, a partner in 2 Boston law firms, and an executive in 2 Fortune 50 companies. From 1994 to 1997, Deval was Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, the US government's top civil rights position, appointed by President Bill Clinton. He later became Massachusetts' first Black governor, serving from 2007 to 2015, and one of only 2 Black governors elected in the United States. He is a Rockefeller Fellow, a Henry Crown Fellow of the Aspen Institute, and the recipient of 20 honorary degrees. After his service as governor, he founded a groundbreaking impact investment fund at Bain Capital, and is co-chair of an organization called American Bridge 21st Century. He remains engaged in grassroots political organizing through its Bridge Together initiative, which supports local organizing efforts to engage disenfranchised and marginalized voters in the electoral process. His memoir was called A Reason to Believe: Lessons from an Improbable Life. As Deval was becoming the governor of Massachusetts, he quoted his grandmother as saying, "Hope for the best and work for it." That spirit of optimism and striving is at the heart of Deval Patrick's life and work, and at the heart of public leadership. We're honored and delighted that Deval is bringing that spirit to the Kennedy School community and will be helping our students to become leaders like him, the kind of leaders that we need. Please join me in welcoming Governor Deval Patrick, now Professor Deval Patrick, to Harvard Kennedy School and to tonight's event. Deval.
Doug, thank you so much for the incredibly generous introduction and for the warm welcome to the faculty here and to the community here at the Kennedy School. Rudy, thank you for the warm invitation to be with you, and good evening, everyone, and happy Black History Month. It's good to be with everybody this afternoon, but I told Rudy I'm uncomfortable giving a full-on lecture, especially on a subject as important as the state of leadership. For one thing, I'm a little bit out of the speech-making business. But for another, and more importantly, I came to the Kennedy School to reflect on the very subject you asked me to speak about this evening. And I've been here only about 2 weeks. So instead of a formal lecture, I'm going to keep it to a few observations, comments, just to set the context, and then we can have some conversation. About the Kennedy School, I can say this much after 2 weeks. It is inspiring to be among so many people so dedicated to make our democracy better. And I find myself thinking to myself, they better hurry up, because our democracy is in trouble. And in some ways, that's the failure of leadership, if you will, that I want to talk about at the outset. In my opinion, there are two profound challenges to our democracy today, only one of which we even talk about. The first challenge is how to make it function, how to make it easy and transparent to register, stay registered, vote, and have that vote counted. We are all familiar with the 19 states with Republican-led legislatures who have enacted measures to frustrate, complicate, and when they want to, overturn the vote. And we're also all familiar, I'm sure, with the recent failure of the Congress, in particular the Senate, as well as of the Supreme Court, to right those wrongs. I would argue that these new vote suppression laws are part of a larger legacy that includes hyper-partisan gerrymandering, purging of registration rolls, the flood of money, much of it dark, into politics, the persistent and recently successful attacks on the Voting Rights Act. Disinformation amplified by social media is another device in wide use. These and more are pieces of a fundamentally anti-democratic strategy methodically implemented over time. I know this is a nonpartisan event, but I think I can say as a factual matter, Republicans, at least at the national level, have apparently concluded they can't win a fair fight. And Democrats, meanwhile, have seemed naive or flat-footed from time to time while this trap was so carefully laid. I'm sure there is a whole course worth of leadership lessons in that history, culminating in the Senate hiding behind the filibuster rule just late last year. But that's just one of the big challenges facing our democracy, how to make it function. The second big challenge is how to make it matter. See, I think we have focused mainly on how to make the vote accessible and hardly at all on how to make it meaningful. And we are dealing with those consequences too. This to me is, in a way, the heavier leadership lift, and thus the most, I think there are the most serious shortcomings. And I want to unpack this in a personal way, maybe picking up on some of the points that Doug made in his introduction. I grew up, as Doug said, on the south side of Chicago, much of that time on welfare and in a crowded tenement, overcrowded and under-resourced schools. I got a break when I was 14 to go to a boarding school outside of Boston, and then to come to college and Harvard and to law school here at Harvard. I've served, as Doug said, as a civil rights and business lawyer, as an executive in 2 big companies, as an investor and entrepreneur, and a 2-term governor, and now I'm called professor. How about that? My story in many ways is probably a lot like many of yours, of not being defined by the circumstances of my birth. It's a story not told often enough, but it was once told more often in this country than any other place on earth. That's an American story. But I'm worried about the American story. The American dream is further and further out of reach for more and more people. I always knew that there were other kids on the South Side just as creative and ambitious as me who never got their chance. Now I see those kids everywhere. I always knew when the steel mills closed on the South Side that folk felt abandoned and even betrayed by a nameless, faceless economy. Now I sense that feeling everywhere. I've always known what it was like to have opioids fill the vacuum because they moved into our own home. Now they've moved in everywhere. The cheery economic indicators don't tell the whole story and rarely have. Inflation was supposedly low not long ago, so long as you didn't count the cost of healthcare or rent or college tuition. Unemployment is low today, so long as you do count both or all 3 of the low-wage jobs so many folks do just to survive, and that many a post-pandemic worker just refuses to return to. The truth is that the poor have been stuck in poverty for a long time, and the middle class are 1 or 2 paychecks away from being poor. And that was true before the pandemic made many of these realities so much harder to overlook. And that, to my mind, is a sustained failure of leadership. Nobody serious in either party believed trickle-down economics, including its central myth that tax cuts stimulate growth, was anything but voodoo economics until Ronald Reagan won on that platform, and then everybody, including a lot of Democrats, embraced it. Nobody thought mass incarceration or that criminalizing poverty would make us safer until polls showed it appealed to so-called undecided voters, and then the political class embraced it. When opioid addiction was rampant in my old neighborhood, it was a criminal matter, but when it reached the suburbs, it became a public health crisis. Look, societies grow, times change, I understand that. But the persistent failure of leadership I'm talking about is relentless focus on the next news or election cycle and the next poll, and not the next generation. The examples are as serious and as consequential in the private sector as well. Today, white, rural, working class folks experience the same economic insecurity and social isolation, the same suicide and addiction rates as Black people have for generations. Many feel the same anxiety, fear, and even anger at how those issues become issues at election time and then seem to vanish in between. It should surprise no one that fully 1/3 of eligible Americans simply don't vote, not just because it's harder to do than it should be, but because we haven't shown them it matters. See, my American story was never just about what I left behind, but also what I brought along. I carry lessons still from that neighborhood, 2 in particular that have shaped my own life and deeply influenced how I think about leadership. One is about community, like the one I grew up in, where every child was under the jurisdiction of every single adult on the block. And how membership in community is about seeing your stake in your neighbor's dreams and struggles, as well as your own. And the other lesson was about generational responsibility, that each of us is supposed to do what we can to leave things better for those who come behind us. And so what does that add up to? Voter apathy is a profound challenge to our democracy that reflects a deeper failure of leadership, a failure of our leaders to ask us, to challenge us to turn to each other rather than on each other, and a failure to spend political capital, not just accumulate it, to leave things better for those who come behind us. We hear a lot in politics about what's wrong with the other side and hardly anything about what's right with ours. A lot about the merits and demerits of this or that program and hardly anything about why it matters to enabling the society and future we all crave. And I do not think we are dealing with just a message problem or the problem of one side being quicker or more ruthless than the other. I think we lack enough serious, purposeful, authentic leaders who get close to regular people, not just consultants and donors, who listen closely to regular people, not just polls, and who convey by their words and their deeds that we are about trying to leave things better for those who come behind us. I think the American dream is defining for us and for strivers around the world, the source of our national power. Opportunity and a fair chance to make the most of it is worth fighting for, but we're going to have to recognize that the choices many would-be leaders would have us make are false, and we're going to have to call them out. I am a proud Democrat, but I don't have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. You don't have to hate business to work for social justice. You don't have to hate police to believe Black lives matter. You don't have to crash the economy to have a livable planet or to sacrifice return for long-term value. You don't have to hate the outcast and vulnerable to secure the border or to justify your own membership in the American community. You don't have to hate the rich to care about and to lift up the poor. We need leaders who will take us above the performance art, or I should say the acting out, that passes for leadership today. Leaders who understand that to get results that last, we are going to have to build bridges, indeed to be bridges. Leaders who model a politics that says we don't have to agree on everything before we work together on anything. I am not talking about leaders who are merely transactional, without values or conviction, far from it. I'm talking about leaders who are woke, but leave room in those wonderful words of Anand Giridharadas for the still waking. That's not just the only way to govern. That's the only way to restore meaning to our democracy, to invite people to take a chance again on their own civic and political future. And by the way, for you skeptics out there, I'm convinced it's the only way to win and to deserve to win. That's the kind of leadership I feel has been in short supply, and for some while now, I have to say. I do see some signs of hope, and I hope we can talk about that in the conversation. Why don't we have that now? Thanks.
You did say that you were not going to lecture, but you lectured, and we very much appreciate it. Now we're going to turn to a dialogue that's going to be moderated by Donna Brazile. Donna Brazile is, we know, an American political strategist, campaign manager, political analyst, who served twice as the acting chair of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. But she is much more than that. She's a teacher, a mentor, a supporter of countless young, diverse professionals in Washington, D.C. and throughout the world. She is currently an ABC contributor, and before that, Fox News and CNN. She was the first African-American to direct a major presidential campaign. And she's worked on many, including Jesse Jackson and Walter Mondale. Donna, you're a trailblazer, and we thank you that you're able to join us today to lead this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy, and it's always a great honor to see you, and to Dean Elmendorf. What a pleasure it is to have an opportunity to hear your words in celebration of Black History Month, and to my good friend, someone who I've known to be a trailblazer and a leader, Governor. Thank you for those wonderful words. I would put them in a category of a sermon, because I do believe that you covered everything. You covered the democracy in trouble, the dysfunction that we see in our American politics, what I call the performance drama that we see on our cable television. We lack civility, and we're going to talk about how to rebuild trust in government, civility, and much, much more. But again, I want to start by saying congratulations on your appointment
Thank you.
as the co-director for the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. The purpose of the center is to develop principled, effective public leaders, which directly relates to our conversation that we're going to have. And in one word, I guess, maybe two words, what is the state of our leadership? How do you see it? You have served as governor, you have been in public life for a long time, but you're also a businessman, an entrepreneur, and now a professor. So how would you describe the state of American leadership today? And what steps should we take to try to bring civility back into our politics so that no matter what your differences, our identities are not formed by just our differences?
Wow. So you did say one or two words, really? That's
Well, you
supposed to-
start the sermon, I gotta keep.
Well, first of all, Donna, it's so nice to see you, and thank you for agreeing to do this. And when we get off camera, tell me how to get one of those incredible backdrops, because I love my new office, Dean Elmendorf, but I need something like this, really. So I think the state of our leadership, and I think, you know, we are by implication, but we probably ought to just say our political leadership is mixed. Actually, I shouldn't limit it to political. I think it's mixed. I think the signs of hope, the signs of worry are the ones I laid out. They're just bad habits, not bad people, just bad habits, right? We get in this. I mean, look at us. We're doing it. We're doing what I'm worried about right now. We got everybody talking about what a bloodbath it's going to be for Democrats in the midterms. Nobody's voted. Nobody. And we have already declared what the outcome is going to be. And it has, like it or not, a self-fulfilling quality to it. Doesn't mean it has to turn out there that way, but it has you get out on the ground, you talk to people. You talk to the folks who are organizing. And they feedback, well, what I heard is it doesn't matter. So why should I be doing it before we have done the work? That idea of we're trying to outsmart the electorate before we turn to the electorate and ask them to tell us what they want the result to be and go persuade them what we think the result ought to be. It has a lot more, and that sort of thing gets a lot of airtime in the minds of an awful lot of us. Not everybody, but an awful lot. You have a huge following. You don't have that. You don't bring that kind of message. Yours is much more nuanced and respectful of a range of voices, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, sir.
At the same time, I look at all these folks who showed up in the streets around the country after the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and they stayed in the streets, you know, overwhelmingly peaceful. And they stayed in the streets despite our habit of short attention span in this country. They have kept consciousness up. I think of the two Black CEOs who organized the hundreds of other CEOs to go on the record in the name of their companies, opposing the vote suppression laws in Georgia and in Texas. I think of there's a sort of I don't want to make it entirely generational because I don't want to be left out. But I do feel like there's a generation that has sort of put its collective foot down and said, we don't have to accept the bad habits that have brought us here. And I love that because it gives a lot more room for some of our leaders who are already in power, or it ought to do what I think they know is the right thing. I think the big disconnect is to get those voices respected and heard by the folks who are in power today.
So as a leader, what would you tell your current governors? I mean, this is a big election year. 36 states will be holding gubernatorial election. What would you tell them in terms of reaching out to their voters? What are the words? What are the dynamics needed or necessary to ensure that in our functioning democracy, we can get voters or citizens to pay attention to our leaders, especially those at the state level?
Well, I think, Brian Stevenson always talks about the importance of being proximate. We raise a tremendous amount of money in a lot of campaigns. We raise a lot of money in a lot of living rooms and ballrooms and so forth to build a relationship with voters through 30-second ads in the last few weeks or months of the campaign. Wouldn't it be something if we took half that money and invested it in grassroots organizing and did it early and did it not just through the campaign, but for existing local groups, sort of thing we're trying to do with Bridge Together. And lots of it's what Stacey did over a decade, right? In Georgia, excuse me. It's what Stacey Abrams did, excuse me.
That's right.
I don't mean to sound unduly familiar. Over a decade, right? And stuck with it even after her own campaign was unsuccessful. And it was that investment over a decade that made possible Senators Warnock and I'm having a brain freeze. And his colleague from Georgia,
Also, yeah,
election and in the special election, right? It's why there's so much more excitement on the ground in Georgia now, with her campaign for governor and for Raphael Warnock's campaign for re-election than you will sometimes hear in the national news, because there's a relationship, and I think. It's hard if you are in office to make the time to do the job and also be out. And you will certainly get a lot of consultants making the cases a lot more efficient to buy the TV and radio time and do the online ads and so on. But I'm telling you, you know this, just as a human being, nothing beats personal contact. And when you're out there, listen, because you learn stuff. You find out whether the agenda you think is important is actually the one that matters to people.
in your 2015 commencement address to the Harvard class of 2015, you told them, and I quote, to be a little uneasy about what they don't know about the world because they would hear the yearning of a restless world. You wanted them to be uneasy about poverty, racism, global warming, healthcare disparities, and homelessness. It sounds like a commencement address that you can deliver this coming spring to the class of 2022. But as you well know, today's generation, many young voters feel alienated by the current political environment. They're giving up on our democracy. They're giving up on our government. They're giving up on the leadership that we have in this country. What leadership skills do you think they need to develop? I know as I was growing up in the segregated Deep South, you grew up on the South side of Chicago. I grew up in the segregated Deep South. We had to learn coping skills.
That's right.
And that required us to be leaders in our own community, leaders just to get out, or as I said, across that proverbial train track so that I could be on the road to becoming a college graduate. So what leadership skills do you think are most important to develop? And I know you can speak to a generation that is yearning to be connected and to have greater responsibility so that they can take their place on the stage.
Yeah, I mean, I love the sort of impatience of this generation. I want that impatience, and I'm careful, or I try to be careful not to tamp that down, because on some things we've had too much. Some problems we've had too much time with, and on other problems we're running out of time. I think of global warming, climate change in that respect. So I encourage that, but I also, that I keep coming back to that line of Anand Girdadas, that it's wonderful that so many people are woke. But the big question today is whether we're going to leave room for the still waking. Because if you actually want to govern, you have to govern for everybody, the people who agree with you and the folks who don't. And it doesn't mean you have to water it down, but you have to show the respect of having heard them and listen to them. You got to go out and let people yell at you. You know, I mean, it's not pleasant, and it's not always safe. You know, I've been in those situations. So have you, Donna. But there is a power in the respect shown by showing up where people are in every sense of the term and letting them tell you what they are looking for in their government and from their leadership. So I think it's about, there's a humility as well as that impatience and righteousness that I think are ingredients to keep in equipoise for successful leadership.
Apologies for that noise in the background. Zora is named after Zora Neale Hurston, the famous poet. And I guess the mail, we just got our mail delivered. I haven't seen my mail in almost 2 days. So Zora just wanted me to know that Chewy.com just arrived. So I apologize for that.
I got a granddaughter named Zora, and she often makes those sorts of sounds in inappropriate moments too.
I believe you. I want to talk a little bit more and dig deeper because I'm on 2 college campuses. I'm on Georgetown and Howard University. And one of the things that I get from my students, I spend a lot of time on campus listening to them, trying to help them connect the dots. They have majors in computer science, poli-science, and history, finance, but they don't know how to connect that dot. And I keep telling them is because you cannot tweet about it,
Yes.
post on Facebook, put it on Instagram. You actually have to pick up the phone and call. How do you encourage and inspire young people to do just that? Pick up that phone, make that call Rudy and say, look, I want to serve as your intern when I come to Washington, D.C. Call me and say, hey, I want to run for office one day. What should I do? How do you inspire them to go beyond all of this great technology that we all are using? You should see this is like a mini studio. Thank you to ABC and Fox and others. Mm-hmm. But how do you encourage them to pick that phone up and actually make that call or write that letter out and put it in the mail and go and present themselves?
Well, and I'd take it a step further. Go show up. You know, go be with people. Go listen to people. You know, my grandmother used to say when she'd ask me something and I'd say, well, I don't know, and she'd say, what you don't know could fill a book. It's amazing what you don't know. It's amazing how certain we are in Washington and state capitals and capitol buildings and so on in great universities about a whole range of subjects where people have not actually gotten really close to the people who are affected. I used to say to my team, I'm interested in policy, but basically where it touches people. Don't bring me abstracts. You got to tell me how that particular policy proposal actually matters when it gets right down to somebody's life. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. We and why it's so important to be out and with people. We had a sentencing reform initiative when I was in office in the first term. And interestingly, in those days, Donna, the folks who were making progress in ending mandatory minimum sentencing were mainly Republican governors. They started that move because they said, you know what, we can't afford this anymore. The fiscal path, but they got there. And here I am with this Democratic legislature who, of course, viewed anything like that as exposing folks to the charge of soft on crime, right?
Soft on crime.
There it is again. So it just seemed like, look, we needed to do this. We knew we had popular momentum in front of us, but we're having trouble moving the legislature. And I was out talking about these grand plans and all that sort of thing. And people kept coming up to me and saying, you know what? I've got an uncle, a father, a brother who was in and who is out now. And their problem is that they can't get a job because, you know, they have to disclose that they have a record and that they can't even get past the application if they are given an application. So what you need to do is what now is called eliminate the ban the box, I guess it is.
And the box.
Right. And, you know, I had heard about this, but I hadn't, it wasn't central to what we were trying to do. We put it in our proposal. We eventually got the package passed. The thing that got the most attention was this ban the box, what we call Quarry Reform. And Donna, we went out to Freedom House in Roxbury in Boston to sign the bill. And there are a few hundred people in a room that's supposed to have maybe 100 people in, and the fire department was about to tell everybody to leave. No air conditioning and the hottest day in the history of time. And you know, I'm working my way in this really just euphoric crowd up to the little table to sign the bill, and I do, and I make a few remarks. It's time to leave, and this guy hands me his cell phone, and he says, Governor, just talk to my friend. And I took the phone, and I said, hello, and he said, this bill means a lot. I really appreciate it. And I said to him, well, just make the most of it. And he said, I will. Gave him back the phone. 4 years later, I'm in the western part of the state, on my way to an event. We're a little bit early. We stopped to get lunch at a new restaurant in downtown Springfield. We're standing in front waiting for the takeout, and this guy in chef's togs comes walking up, and he does a double take, and he says, you Governor Patrick? I said, yes, I am. He said, do you remember signing that Quarry Reform bill? I said, yes, I do. He said, you remember speaking to a guy on a phone that day? I said, as a matter of fact, I do. He said, I was that guy. I said, excuse me? He said, I was sitting in jail when I took that call. He said, on account of that bill, I got out. I got this job. I'm the executive chef in this restaurant today. What I'm talking about is it's not always the grand jet. It matters when it touches somebody, and and the folks on the ground will tell you what it needs to touch them and how it has to touch them. And that is a different kind of leadership that I think America's craving right now.
I thank you for that. We're going to open this up in a few minutes to some of the participants who would like to also have a conversation with you. But before I turn it over to one or two of them, I want to ask you a little bit about Black History Month. As you well know, Black History Month is a time for celebration, a celebration of Black history, the history we have all made as Americans. So it's American history. But as you well know, nowadays in certain states, books by, Ruby Bridges.
Can you believe
It
it?
wrote from my hometown of New Orleans.
Yep.
That book is being banned. In Tennessee, certain books by Dr. King, they're being banned. So how can we talk about American history if we can't talk about Black history?
Well, you
And
just
vice versa.
you just answered the question. Either we're going to learn our whole story or not. And it's the notion that you turn children into snitches on their teachers if they feel uncomfortable in the classroom. What is the point of education if not to make us uncomfortable? What is the point except to expose us to something we haven't learned? Now, the appeal, I think, in Virginia and other places where that's a part of politics today, yes, is certainly racist. But all the folks who are agitated, I'm convinced, are not racist. Some want to feel respected as parents having an influence on their kids' education. It gets expressed this way because that's the only avenue. Our friend Terry didn't mean what he said when he said parents should stay out of the classroom or whatever that comment was in the Virginia race. But those words confirmed in a whole lot of people what they worry about, which is that, it's sort of government will take it from here. You don't need to be involved. And I think we have to find a way to engage those parents who are making all this. And what's next? We're not going to teach, I don't know, math because division makes people uncomfortable. No, of course, we're going to do things that are hard, that stretch us. That's what education is supposed to be about. And the point of education is not just to create great employees, it's to create great citizens. And everybody has a stake in that.
And, I think when you talk about your grandmother and all of her important lessons that you learned, I think about my own grandmother. She was born just a few years during Reconstruction. And yet, after the 1920 19th Amendment was established, she still was unable to vote. Mm-hmm. She was not able to vote until after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act.
Yep.
She was 78 years old. And by that age, she had seen her husband fight in World War I, her sons fight in World War II, and my dad in Korea, where he earned 3 Bronze Stars and a UN Medal for Valor. And yet he was not able to vote until he was well into his 40s. So the right to vote is precious, and telling that history will hopefully inspire my nieces and nephews to honor and respect that vote. And so I am grateful that you made the comment earlier about the right to vote and how sacred it is and how important it is. And next month, as you all know, we'll be celebrating once again or commemorating that march across the Pettus Bridge. Yes. And we still have many bridges to go. The first question is going to come from a good friend, someone here in the District of Columbia, Charles Character. Is it Character? Character. Yeah, with the class, MPP class of 2007, he's the president of DC Alumni Council, HKS Alumni Board member. So thank you so much, Charles. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Ms. Brazile. Always a pleasure to hear and see a fellow Georgetown professor. Governor Patrick, thank you for your time and your earlier remarks. Congress used to be an institution where things got done. Now, in this era of hyper-partisanship, it seems as if only major funding vehicles get passed in Congress.
In bits and pieces.
Yeah, there you go. And, former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, used to say, politics should end at 5 p.m. How do you think we can get past this era of hyper-partisanship?
Well, look, first of all, hyper-partisanship is part of the strategy, right? It's not accidental. I mean, I had this BBC interview earlier today, and we were talking about proposals around regulating big tech, and particularly the disinformation and amplification that happens in that setting and its impact on children. And there were 2 bills and 2 sets of senators, bipartisan, who joined us in the rollout yesterday in DC. And the anchor was saying, well, what makes you think this is going to happen? And it's so interesting that, she was giggling while she was saying it, while she was asking about whether the so-called greatest democracy on the planet can pass a bill where there is bipartisan support. 70–80% of the public want this kind of legislation. But as long as we treat each other as the enemy rather than just the opposition, we're going to be stuck here. And to me, trying to get some of the folks who are enjoying being obstacles to come along is not going to happen unless there are political consequences. And that, to me, means we got to organize and show up like never before and overwhelm these partisan gerrymandered districts. And, we got to, I'll tell you, here's an example. We got a fantastic candidate running to win the primary for the United States Senate in Kentucky. In DC, he hardly gets any notice. If he's a Black man, by the way. If he'd had a couple more weeks in the last cycle, I'm telling you, he would have been the nominee and Mitch McConnell would be retired right now. But he doesn't show up on the screens of powerful people because he doesn't fit the profile of what we think wins in Kentucky. We got to pay attention to who's working on the ground and lift them up. And more often than not, they are working in a way and in a context which isn't just about being mad at the other side. It's about getting stuff done. So I think until they feel the political heat, we're going to have trouble in the Congress. And I think until we on our side, and I'm maybe here I'm talking mainly about Democrats, but also moderate Republicans, until we're willing to invest the time and the money and the interest and the energy in lifting up some of this talent and some of this engagement at the grassroots, they won't feel that political heat.
I have to interject and ask you about the role of money. Because when I managed Al Gore's campaign, remember back then we had limits, $65 million in 2 months.
Yes.
But the general election was a lot of money. But today, as you well know, candidates can raise upwards of $1 billion.
Yeah.
$1 billion.
It's scary. It's scary. And a lot of it's dark, you know. I mean, and I say that as somebody who's a co-chair of a PAC. What is it? What's the figure? Something like 40-50% of a member's time is spent raising money.
Yes.
I mean, that's the other part of the answer to the question just asked, right? They don't get enough done because they're spending a lot of time trying to think about the next election, trying to raise for the next election. I mean, you know, all the analytics on that are done. Everybody understands what we have to do. We have to. Apparently shaming people isn't going to work, and unilateral disarmament is nuts. We are probably going to have to either change the court or change the Constitution. There's a mechanism to do that. The fact that it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying.
Speaking of the courts, Governor, as you well know, sometime this spring, there will be a vacancy on the court. Justice Breyer announced on January 26th that he intends to leave at the end of this term. President Biden made a commitment during the campaign to put a Black woman on the court, and he will keep his word. So can you tell us about the selection process and what do you think the outcome would look like? You probably have heard some of the commentary by Senators Cruz and Kennedy and Cotton and others. So what do you think is going to happen?
Well, you mean look, if President Biden nominated Jesus Christ or Mother Mary, they'd be acting out. So we should stop worrying about that. The nominee is going to be superlative. We know that. I'm excited that the nominee is going to be a Black woman. You probably are more familiar with the actual process than me and all the skullduggery that's involved. And I feel so badly for the poor nominee and what she and her family are going through or will soon go through. But it's important. It's important. And you know, the self-righteousness of the senators you mentioned. It is what it is. It's performance art again. And I think we have to stay level-headed. I think we have to do the work. We have to ask, we have to make sure our own caucus is supportive. And I think it starts, frankly, by getting the nominee up to and in front of members as soon as possible after the nomination. Because as Senator Kennedy said to me, it's a lot harder for people to blast you if they've actually shaken your hand and looked you in the eye.
Well, thank you for that. One of my students from Howard University sent in a question. I don't know if she's able to get through, but she wanted to know more about the redistricting process and what happened recently in the state of Alabama. And her final question is, will we ever have a fair map?
So the redistricting process is an inherently political process, Donna, as you know, and what happened in Alabama was, if I'm up to speed, first the court invalidated it, and then it went up on appeal, and the high court said the map could stay in place until they reviewed the case, which is in effect saying it's okay because we're going to have an election before they review that case. I think that's where the case stands. Are we ever going to have fair redistricting? I think we could. I don't think it's ever going to be entirely non-political. And I don't think it's supposed to be, but it's gotten a little silly. I mean, look at some of those lines. Look at you know, it's like the line goes down the middle of the street and it skips, you know, every other Black household or Democratic voting household and so on, just to make sure it's as surgical as possible. Now, again, we need to stop presuming that everybody within the lines agrees with everything that let us say, Jim Jordan stands for. It's just not true. He and people like him get to stay in office because most of the people have checked out. And so why not go show up in a few of those districts and organize really hard and over time, not just in time for the next election, but over time, and make him feel the heat. Neither he makes a change or he gets voted out, because there'll be other people who realize and accept they have that power. We wouldn't have ever gotten Barack Obama elected or reelected, but certainly elected the first time if it was up to the political establishment alone. It's not that they were hostile to him necessarily, some were, but that wasn't true within the party. It's because it wasn't his turn. It wasn't, you know, he wasn't in line. And what he did, I think, was so important, was remind people this is our choice. We get to do this. And he motivated a lot of people around understanding that power. And I think we have to do that over and over again at every level of election.
I do believe he transformed politics. He inspired a generation to stand in long lines, and we're now really concerned that that generation may not show up, and they really need to show up. We have a question from Rhodas. Are you here? I saw your hand up.
Yes, I am.
Hi, Rhoda.
Hello.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you.
No problem. It's great to see you, be in your presence, Donna Brazile. I only know you on CNN. It's great to see you, Dean Elmendorf. Great to be a part of this conversation, Governor. My question is, I mean, I am new here. I'm a recent graduate from the Kennedy School. I graduated in last May 2021, and I'm learning a lot.
Where are you from?
I'm from Ethiopia.
Ah, welcome.
Yes.
I hope your family's out of harm's way.
They're fine for the moment, but yeah, things are still uncertain. Yeah. But I mean, I am learning a lot about Black history and Black History Month. I understand that it's paying tribute to generations of African Americans who've struggled with diversity and who've tried to achieve full citizenship. And this citizenship is still, some Africans are also seeking citizenship today. So my question is, how do we link the Africans that are coming to the US now, still seeking this refuge and wanting to become a part of the African American diaspora? How can we link and increase participation in citizenship? Yeah.
I really love that question. You know, I remember, I don't know if you've had this experience, Rhodas. I lived in Sudan between college and law school. And it was the first time I'd ever traveled outside the United States. And it's the first time I had that kind of perspective that made me think hard about what it meant to be an American. And the experience I had more often than not was not folks asking me about being a Black American, but being an American. Because, and it's where I began to get this sense that there was something magnetic about the idea of a country organized not around, geography or language or frankly even race, but around a handful of civic ideals. That is an incredibly powerful and enduring attraction, to the point where I would say we are our most powerful when we are making conspicuous progress, closing the gap between our reality and our ideals, and are most confusing to the world when we languish and stop. So I feel like the thing that motivates immigrants from everywhere, including Africa, to come here is the same thing that motivates the sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters of the enslaved. And it also motivates us to insist that America be true to herself, to yearn for America to be true to herself, and to work for America to be true to herself. And that is sometimes it's almost like it's dissonant sometimes, to love a country that doesn't always love you back. But there's no place else where you can come from someplace else and become American. I mean, and become that country. You can go live in France for a long time, or in Italy, but it's not quite that. You won't become Italian or become French. You can come here and become American, because we're a hodgepodge of everything anyway, and always were. And that isn't, at least by definition, what is supposed to make you American. So I love the idea that you would feel connection to the same journey or a similar journey of Donna and me. And I welcome you, and I think you would feel welcome. I think, by the way, if I may say, also check us, and meaning Black Americans, because we will sometimes speak in broad terms about an experience which is not always like the experience you have had at home in Ethiopia or coming here. So we want to make sure that we learn to speak in ways that capture your aspirations too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, we have come to the end of this remarkable program, and what a way to end this conversation during Black History Month. Governor, as you well know, our president reminds us almost daily that we're at an inflection point, and that we're fighting for the soul of this country, the soul of America. So how do we fight for the soul of this country as American citizens to make it better and greater in this remarkable century?
Well, I think there are all kinds of actions that are happening and need to keep happening, including some of the things I said earlier about the importance of identifying and supporting those local grassroots groups that are building community all the time and are focused on that idea of having a stake and seeing a stake in each other. I think we're going to have to take deep breaths a lot and continue to listen to those who may not agree with us without losing, as Louis Pasteur would say, our temper or our self-confidence. And I think we're going to have to do what Black people have been doing for generations, which is to reflect on how hard it was and how much sacrifice brought us to this point, to remind us that we have no business thinking that we can sit down now.
Finish the fight. And with that, I want to turn this program back over to Rudy, and I believe we're going to present the Vice President of the Black Alumni Association, MPP class of 2007, Vice President Keitra Fuller.
Thank you, Ms. Brazile. It's an honor. On behalf of the Harvard Kennedy School Black Alumni Association, I would like to first thank our audience for joining us today for our inaugural Black History Month State of Leadership Lecture and Dialogue. On behalf of the BAA Executive Board, I would like to extend our gratitude to Governor Deval Patrick, Donna Brazile, Ms. Devin Gates, Dean Elmendorf, the Office of Alumni Relations, the Greater Harvard Community of Black Alumni Associations, and the Washington, D.C. HKS Alumni Council. Before we depart, I would like to take a point of privilege to introduce you to the current HKS Black Alumni Association Board. Rudy Brioche is the current president. Laura Ellen McKinney is our secretary. The treasurer is Oliver McQueen. Annette Raget is our student liaison director. Lena Benson is our communications director. And our current directors at large are Renee Rambo Rogers and Rhoda Sayom. Thank you all for joining us and have a great night.